The red carpet at the Metropolitan Museum of Art sparkled under the bright lights as celebrities arrived for the most exclusive fashion event of the year. The Met Gala 2025 theme was Guardians of Time, celebrating those who protect history and culture across centuries. Camera flashes exploded like fireworks as A-list stars posed in their designer gowns and artistic creations. The air buzzed with excitement as fashion icons, movie stars, billionaires, and cultural influencers mingled on the stone steps of the museum, trying to capture the perfect photograph for their social media accounts. Anna Wintour stood near the grand entrance, her signature bob perfectly styled despite the May humidity, greeting each guest with the calculated warmth that had made her the most powerful person in fashion for decades. She had organized this spectacular event for over 20 years, but tonight felt different. The theme had attracted some of the most creative and daring interpretations she had ever witnessed. A famous actress wore a breathtaking gown made entirely of antique clock faces and gears, the metallic elements catching the light with every movement. A chart-topping pop star's outfit resembled ancient Roman armor, but crafted from thousands of gold and crystal pieces that created a mesmerizing display of light and shadow. The army of photographers worked frantically along the designated areas, their professional cameras clicking rapidly as they captured every angle, every expression, every detail of the elaborate outfits. They knew that these images would be seen by millions of people around the world within minutes of being taken. Social media platforms buzzed with real-time commentary as fashion critics, bloggers, and ordinary fans analyzed each outfit with the intensity of art historians examining masterpieces. The energy was absolutely electric, with everyone in attendance. Trying to outdo the memorable moments from previous years, television crews from major networks broadcast live coverage to audiences across the globe. Fashion commentators provided running analysis of each arrival, discussing the symbolism behind various design choices and speculating about which outfits would be remembered as iconic years later. The Met Gala had evolved far beyond a simple fundraising event. It had become a cultural phenomenon that influenced fashion trends, sparked conversations about art and society, and created moments that would be analyzed and discussed for decades. This was the night where fashion transformed into wearable art, where creative boundaries were not just pushed, but completely shattered, and where careers could be made or broken with a single outfit choice. Emerging designers dreamed of having their creations worn on this red carpet, knowing that the right photograph could launch their career into the stratosphere. Established fashion houses invested months of work and enormous budgets into creating show-stopping pieces that would generate headlines and social media. The guest list represented the pinnacle of achievement across multiple industries. Oscar-winning actors mingled with Grammy-winning musicians. Pulitzer, prize-winning authors chatted with tech billionaires. And world-renowned artists discussed their latest projects with fashion designers whose names had become global brands. The conversations flowing through the crowd covered everything from upcoming film projects to social justice initiatives, from technological innovations to artistic collaborations that would shape culture in the coming years, but nothing could have prepared the crowd for what happened at exactly 7:47 p.m. The animated chatter and laughter suddenly died down as people began pointing toward the bottom of the red carpet with expressions of confusion and curiosity. A figure in a traditional British Royal Guard uniform walked slowly up the steps with measured, deliberate movements, complete with the iconic tall black bearskin hat, the scarlet-red tunic with gleaming gold braiding, perfectly pressed black trousers with red stripes, immaculately polished black boots that reflected the camera flashes. He moved with the kind of military precision that could only come from years of intensive training. His white ceremonial gloves held no accessories, no designer handbag, no fashion statement piece that would typically be expected at such an event. There was no stylist walking beside him, no publicist managing his image, no entourage of assistants ensuring everything went according to plan. He walked alone, carrying himself with the dignity and bearing that had been drilled into him through countless hours of military discipline and protocol training. The photographers stopped snapping pictures of the celebrities who had been posing just moments before. Their expensive cameras and professional lenses now focused entirely on this unexpected and unprecedented arrival. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd like waves, growing louder as more people noticed what was happening. Security guards positioned strategically around the perimeter of the event looked at each other with uncertainty and concern, their hands instinctively moving toward their communication devices as they tried to determine the appropriate response. Was this part of the evening's planned entertainment? Had Anna Wintour, or one of the event sponsors, hired this guard as an elaborate performance piece designed to complement the Guardians of Time theme? The questions multiplied as people tried to make sense of what they were witnessing. Some guests wondered if this might be a celebrity in costume, making a bold artistic statement about duty, service, and the relationship between tradition and modernity in contemporary society. Fashion experts, scattered throughout the crowd, began whispering theories to each other and to the reporters who eagerly captured every speculation. The uniform appeared completely authentic, down to the smallest details that would be impossible to replicate without access to genuine military equipment. The brass buttons gleamed with the kind of polish that could only be achieved through years of military maintenance routines. The fabric looked genuine, with the particular weight and texture that distinguished real military uniforms from theatrical costumes. Most convincingly, the way the man carried himself suggested real military training, the perfect posture, the measured stride, the expressionless face that had been perfected through countless hours of ceremonial duty. As he continued his measured walk up the red carpet, each footstep placed with deliberate precision, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense with anticipation and uncertainty. This definitely wasn't following the usual carefully choreographed script of Met Gala arrivals. Celebrities who had been posing confidently for photographers just moments earlier now stopped their photo sessions, their attention completely drawn to this mysterious figure. Many pulled out their personal phones to record what was happening, sensing instinctively that they were witnessing something unprecedented that would likely become a viral sensation within hours. The security team began moving closer to the red carpet, though they remained uncertain about how to handle the situation. Removing someone in military uniform who hadn't actually broken any laws or posed any apparent threat would create its own set of problems, especially with dozens of cameras recording every moment. Their training prepared them for many scenarios, but a British Royal Guard appearing uninvited at the Met Gala wasn't covered in any security manual. The Royal Guard's footsteps echoed against the stone steps of the museum, each one deliberate, perfectly timed and executed with the mechanical precision that had been drilled into him through years of ceremonial duties. His breathing remained steady and controlled despite the hundreds of eyes now watching his every movement. Despite the camera flashes that created a strobe light effect around him, and despite the weight of what he was about to do, inside that iconic uniform, beneath the layers of tradition and military protocol, was a man carrying the crushing weight of a desperate mission driven by love, sacrifice, and the precious nature of time itself. No one in that crowd of celebrities, fashion experts, and media professionals could have possibly guessed the deeply personal and heartbreaking story that had brought him to this moment, or how his presence would transform the most exclusive fashion event in the world into the stage for an act of brotherly love that would capture hearts and headlines around the globe. James Mitchell had served as a royal guard at Buckingham Palace for 12 years, dedicating his entire adult life to one of the most demanding and prestigious military positions in the British Armed Forces. He had stood motionless for hours, at a time through rain that soaked through his uniform, snow that accumulated on his bearskin hat, scorching summer heat that made the heavy wool tunic feel like a furnace, and countless tourist photos where visitors tried everything imaginable to make him smile, laugh, or even blink. The tourists came from every corner of the world, each one hoping to be the person who finally broke the legendary stoicism of a Queen's Guard. Children would make the most ridiculous faces imaginable, sticking out their tongues and crossing their eyes while their parents snapped photos. Adults would tell elaborate jokes, often in broken English, convinced that their humor would succeed where others had failed. Teenagers would pose dramatically beside him, sometimes getting uncomfortably close while attempting to create the perfect selfie for their social media accounts. Through it all, James remained a human statue, the perfect embodiment of British military discipline and centuries-old tradition. His fellow guards respected him not just for his unwavering dedication, but for his almost supernatural ability to remain perfectly still, even when tourists got so close he could feel their breath on his face. Or when street performers deliberately tried to distract him with loud music and elaborate acts designed specifically to test his concentration. His daily routine had remained unchanged for over a decade, structured with the precise timing that defined military life. Wake at 5 a.m. sharp, regardless of weather or season. Physical training that kept his body in peak condition, because standing motionless for hours required more core strength and endurance than most people realized. Uniform inspection where every button, every piece of braiding, every fold of fabric had to meet exacting standards that had been refined over generations of ceremonial duty. Then came the hours of standing guard, during which James became more than just a man. He became a living symbol of British heritage, duty, and unwavering commitment. The red tunic weighed heavy on his shoulders, especially during London's surprisingly hot summer days, when the wool felt like it would suffocate him. The tall bearskin hat, made from the fur of Canadian black bears, often felt like it would topple over despite weighing several pounds. But James had trained his neck muscles to hold it steady for hours without the slightest tremor. The white, ceremonial gloves had to remain spotless despite London's pollution and unpredictable weather. His black boots were polished to a mirror finish every single day, reflecting the faces of tourists and the changing London sky with equal clarity. The rifle he carried was a fully functional weapon, though loaded only with ceremonial blanks. During normal duties, serving as both a symbol of the guard's protective role and a reminder that this was serious military service, not theatrical performance. James genuinely loved his job despite all its physical and mental challenges. Serving the Crown gave him a sense of purpose and pride that extended far beyond personal satisfaction. He came from a working-class family in Manchester, where his father had worked in a factory and his mother had cleaned office buildings to make ends meet. Neither of his parents had finished secondary school, and the idea that their son would one day guard the most famous palace in the world had seemed impossible when James was growing up in their small terraced house. Joining the Royal Guard had lifted him to a position of honor and recognition that his parents could never have imagined when they watched him struggle through school, uncertain about his future. The uniform meant everything to him. It represented centuries of unbroken tradition, unwavering loyalty to the monarchy, and service to something greater than himself. When he wore it, he wasn't just James Mitchell from Manchester anymore. He was a guardian of British heritage, a living link to history, a symbol of dedication that inspired respect from people around the world. The selection process to become a Royal Guard had been grueling, testing not just physical fitness and military skills, but psychological resilience and the ability to maintain perfect discipline under extreme pressure. James had excelled in every aspect of the training, but more than that, he had found his calling. The structure, the tradition, the sense of being part of something important, it all resonated with something. Deep in his character, his fellow guards had become like brothers to him over the years. They shared the unique bond that comes from facing identical challenges and upholding the same exacting standards. They understood the mental discipline required to stand perfectly still while tourists made faces at them, the physical demands of maintaining perfect posture for hours, and the pride that came from representing their country on one of the world's most visible stages. But 3 months ago, his perfectly ordered world had crumbled completely when he received a phone call that changed everything he thought he knew about priorities, duty, and what truly mattered in life. He had just finished his shift and was in the guard's changing room, carefully hanging up his ceremonial uniform and replacing it with his everyday clothes, when his phone rang with the distinctive tone he had assigned to his sister Emma's number. However, when he answered with his usual cheerful greeting, the voice on the other end didn't belong to Emma. Instead, a woman with an American accent and a professional but gentle tone identified herself as Dr. Sarah Chen from Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. James felt his heart skip a beat as the doctor explained that Emma had been brought to the emergency room after collapsing at her workplace, and that they had discovered something during their examination that required immediate discussion with her next of kin. The words that followed seemed to echo in slow motion, each syllable hitting James like a physical blow. Advanced stage cancer. Aggressive spread throughout multiple organs, limited treatment options available. Medical terminology washed over him, but the meaning was crystal clear. His beloved younger sister, who had always been the brightest light in their family, was facing a battle she might not win. The timeline the doctor provided was devastating. 6 months, possibly less, depending on how her body responded to treatment. James felt his knees give way as he sat heavily on the wooden bench in the changing room. It's the same bench where he had prepared for thousands of ceremonial duties, where he had shared countless conversations with his fellow guards about everything from weekend plans to career aspirations. His hands shook as he gripped the phone, trying to process information that seemed impossible to accept. His fellow guardsmen in the changing room noticed immediately that something was terribly wrong. His usual composed demeanor had shattered entirely. These men had served alongside him for years, had seen him maintain perfect discipline under the most challenging circumstances, but they had never seen him look so devastated, so completely lost. But James couldn't find the words to explain what he had just learned. How could he tell them that Emma, the sister who had always been his anchor, his source of joy and laughter, was dying? How could he process the reality that all her dreams, all her incredible talent, all her plans for the future might be cut short, just as she was finally starting to make progress in her career? Emma had always been the bright light in their family, the one who could find hope and beauty in the darkest situations. When their parents had been killed in a car accident 10 years earlier, leaving James and Emma as orphans in their early 20s, she had been the one to hold them together emotionally. While James had dealt with his grief by throwing himself completely into military structure and the rigid discipline of guard duty, Emma had channeled her emotions into creativity, art, and the kind of boundless optimism that made everyone around her feel like anything was possible. Emma Mitchell had arrived in New York 5 years earlier with nothing but 2 battered suitcases, a vintage Singer sewing machine that had belonged to her grandmother, and dreams that seemed impossibly large compared to her tiny bank account. She had saved every single penny from her job at a boutique clothing store in London's Camden Market, working extra shifts and living on instant noodles and tea for months to afford the plane ticket and the security deposit on a microscopic studio apartment in Brooklyn. The apartment was barely larger than James's military quarters at the barracks, with a Murphy bed that folded down from the wall and a kitchen that consisted of a 2-burner stove, a mini refrigerator, and exactly 3 feet of counter space. But Emma had transformed this cramped space into a creative sanctuary that pulsed with artistic energy. Fabric samples in every color and texture imaginable covered the walls like a rainbow tapestry. Design sketches were pinned to every available surface, creating a visual diary of her evolving artistic vision. Inspiration boards covered with photographs torn from fashion magazines, architectural details, street art, and museum postcards created a collage of influences that fed her imagination. Her days began before sunrise in a routine that would have exhausted most people. She worked the opening shift at a trendy coffee shop in Soho, arriving at 5:30 a.m. to prepare specialty drinks for New York's early rising professionals. Her hands became permanently stained with coffee, but she used this time to observe fashion trends, watching how Wall Street executives, artists, tourists, and local residents each expressed their identity through clothing choices. After the coffee shop, she would rush across town to attend classes at Parsons School of Design, one of the most prestigious fashion programs in the world. The competition was fierce, filled with students whose parents could afford private tutors, international internships, and connections to major fashion houses. Emma felt out of place among classmates who casually mentioned shopping trips to Paris, or family friends who worked for luxury brands. But she was determined to prove that talent could overcome privilege. Her evenings were spent at a vintage clothing store in the East Village, where she learned to identify quality fabrics, understand construction techniques from different eras, and develop an appreciation for fashion history that would later influence her own designs. The store's owner, as an elderly woman named Rosa, who had worked in New York's garment district for 40 years, became an unofficial mentor, teaching Emma practical skills that weren't covered in her formal classes. Between jobs and classes, Emma rode the subway with a sketchbook always in hand, capturing inspiration from the incredible diversity of New York City. She drew everything from the geometric patterns in Art Deco buildings to the way street performers dressed to express their artistic personas. The city's energy was intoxicating, and she filled notebook after notebook with ideas for designs that reflected the vibrancy and creativity she saw. Everywhere around her, Emma's financial struggles were constant and sometimes overwhelming. She calculated every expense down to the penny, choosing between buying fabric for a project and eating proper meals. She learned to shop for groceries at closing time, when many stores offered discounts on items that would expire soon. Her wardrobe consisted mainly of pieces she had created herself from discounted fabrics or items she had redesigned from thrift store finds. Despite the hardships, Emma's talent was undeniable to anyone who saw her work. Her professors at Parsons recognized something special in her designs, a combination of technical skill and creative vision that couldn't be taught. She had an intuitive understanding of how fabric moved and draped, how colors interacted with each other, and how clothing could tell stories about the people who wore it. Her fellow students often sought her advice on their own projects, knowing that Emma had a gift for seeing solutions to design problems that stumped others. However, talent alone wasn't enough to break into New York's competitive high fashion industry. Success required connections, commendations, and opportunities that were often distributed through networks Emma didn't have access to. She watched as classmates with wealthy families and industry connections secured prestigious internships at major fashion houses, while she continued serving coffee and folding vintage dresses. Trying to make connections one customer at a time, the frustration sometimes felt overwhelming, especially during her final year at Parsons when the pressure to establish a career became intense. Emma would lie awake in her tiny apartment, listening to the sounds of Brooklyn through her thin walls, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake in coming to New York. The student loans she had taken out to supplement her savings were substantial, and the idea of returning to London as a failed fashion designer terrified her more than continuing to struggle in New York. Her breakthrough moment came during her final semester thesis presentation, when she unveiled a collection that had been inspired by her research into historical protective garments throughout different cultures and time periods. Emma had become fascinated by the idea that clothing had always served as armor, both literally and metaphorically, protecting people not just physically but emotionally and psychologically. She had spent months researching everything from medieval chainmail to modern military uniforms. From the ceremonial armor worn by samurai warriors to the protective gear used by contemporary athletes, the research phase alone had taken her to museums, libraries, and historical societies throughout New York, where she photographed artifacts and studied construction techniques that had been refined over centuries. The collection she created was extraordinary, even by Parsons' high standards. She had designed evening gowns that incorporated authentic chainmail elements sourced from antique dealers, but made them elegant and feminine rather than intimidating. Business suits included subtle references to samurai armor in their structure and detailing, giving the wearer a sense of strength and confidence. Her avant-garde pieces transformed elements of modern military uniforms into high-fashion statements that made powerful commentary about protection, strength, and identity in contemporary society. The professor who judged her final presentation, a veteran fashion educator who had seen thousands of student collections over his 25-year career, was genuinely stunned by Emma's work. The technical execution was flawless, but more importantly, the collection demonstrated a maturity of vision and depth of concept that far exceeded what was typically expected from students. He could see immediately that Emma had the rare combination of creative vision, technical skill, and conceptual thinking that define truly great designers. Following his enthusiastic recommendation, Emma was connected with several emerging designers who were establishing their own labels in New York's competitive fashion scene. One of these connections led to her securing a small workspace in a shared studio in Brooklyn, where she could finally spread out her materials and work on larger projects without the constraints of her tiny apartment. For the first time since arriving in New York, Emma felt like she was making real progress toward her dreams. Fashion industry professionals were taking notice of her work. She had a proper workspace where she could create, and her unique aesthetic was beginning to attract attention from boutique stores and individual clients who appreciated her innovative approach to combining historical influences with contemporary fashion. But success in the fashion world moved slowly. Much slower than Emma had anticipated when she first arrived in New York, full of optimism and determination. She continued designing pieces for small boutiques and participating in local fashion shows, gradually building a reputation among New York's fashion insiders. Each small victory felt monumental, but progress toward her ultimate goal of recognition at the highest levels of fashion felt frustratingly slow. Emma dreamed constantly of the day when her work would be featured in major fashion magazines, worn by celebrities on red carpets, or displayed in museums as examples of contemporary fashion as art. The Met Gala represented the absolute pinnacle of fashion recognition, the intersection of high fashion, art, and culture, where careers were made and legends were born. She studied photographs from previous years' events with the same intensity that art students study masterpieces, analyzing not just the visual impact of each outfit, but the cultural conversations they sparked when the devastating cancer diagnosis came. Emma felt like she was drowning in an ocean of shattered dreams and lost possibilities. All the years of struggle, all the small victories and gradual progress, all the hopes and plans for the future, none of it seemed to matter if she wouldn't live long enough to see her dreams fulfilled. The disease felt like a cruel joke, arriving just as her career was finally beginning to gain momentum and recognition. When James arrived at Emma's Brooklyn apartment after spending 3 days at her bedside in the hospital, he was completely unprepared for what he discovered. The small space had been transformed into something that resembled both an art studio and a designer's workshop on the verge of breakthrough. Sketches covered every available surface. The kitchen table, where she normally ate her simple meals, the hardwood floor that served as her main workspace, the walls where they were carefully organized and taped in chronological order, showing the evolution of her ideas. Fabric samples in dozens of colors and textures were organized with the precision of a scientist's laboratory. Rich burgundy velvets sat next to industrial silver mesh. Delicate silk chiffons were paired with sturdy canvas materials that looked like they could withstand a storm. Innovative metallic fabrics that seemed to shift and shimmer in the light were carefully preserved between sheets of tissue paper. Each material had been chosen not just for its aesthetic properties, but for how it could contribute to the story Emma was trying to tell through her clothing. Half-finished garments hung from a makeshift clothes rack positioned near the apartment's single large window, where natural light could illuminate the intricate details of her work. A cocktail dress that incorporated elements of medieval chainmail caught the afternoon sun, creating patterns of light and shadow that danced across the walls. A business suit with subtle samurai-inspired structural elements displayed the kind of craftsmanship that took years to. When James arrived at Emma's apartment after leaving the hospital, he was shocked by what he found. Sketches covered every surface: the kitchen table, the floor, even taped to the walls. Fabric samples in dozens of colors and textures were organized in careful piles. Half-finished garments hung from a makeshift clothes rack near the window. Despite her illness, Emma had been working with an intensity that both impressed and worried him. Emma sat on her small couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at her latest designs spread across the coffee table. She looked up when James entered, and he saw something he had never seen before in his sister's eyes: defeat. The Emma he knew had always bounced back from setbacks with renewed energy. This was different. This was the look of someone who believed her dreams were dying along with her body. James picked up one of the sketches, a stunning evening gown that somehow incorporated elements of medieval armor while remaining elegantly feminine. A technica. Skill required to execute such a design was incredible, but more than that, it told a story. The wearer would look both protected and powerful, beautiful and strong. He realized that Emma's work wasn't just about fashion, It was about transformation, about helping people become the best version of themselves. Over the following days, James learned about Emma's latest collection. She called it Guardians of Time, a series of pieces inspired by protective garments throughout history. There were cocktail dresses that referenced ancient Greek warrior attire, business suits that incorporated samurai armor elements, and avant-garde pieces that reimagined modern military uniforms as high fashion. The collection was Emma's most ambitious work, combining her technical skills with deep research into historical clothing. The irony wasn't lost on James that his sister's collection focused on guardians while he served as a royal guard. As he studied her designs, he began to understand that they were both guardians in their own ways. He protected tradition and ceremony, while she protected the dreams and aspirations that fashion could inspire. Her work had the power to make people feel confident, beautiful, and strong. Wasn't that a form of protection too? Em explained that she had been working on the collection when she received news about the Met Gala 2025 theme. Guardians of Time was a perfect match for her work, but she had no connections to get her designs in front of the right people. The Met Gala invitation list was strictly controlled, dominated by celebrities, established designers, and wealthy patrons. Unknown designers like Emma rarely received recognition at such exclusive events. James watched his sister's energy return as she talked about her work. The sketches represented months of research, countless hours of technical development, and the kind of creative vision that appeared once in a generation. But talent alone wasn't enough in the fashion world. Success required connections, publicity, and opportunities that Emma simply didn't have access to. The idea came to James during a sleepless night as he sat beside Emma's bed while she underwent chemotherapy treatment. She had fallen asleep, clutching her sketchbook, even in her weakened state, refusing to stop creating. The sight of her determination, despite everything she was facing, broke his heart and inspired him at the same time. Emma deserved to see her dreams recognized before it was too late. James began researching the Met Gala, studying everything from security protocols to media coverage patterns. He learned about the strict invitation process, the carefully choreographed red carpet arrivals, and the enormous media attention that surrounded every aspect of the event. Any disruption would be noticed immediately, photographed extensively, shared around the world within minutes. The plan that formed in his mind was risky and would probably end his military career. But as he looked at Emma's designs and saw the incredible talent that might go unrecognized, James realized that some things were more important than following rules. His sister had spent her entire adult life fighting for her dreams. Now, it was his turn to fight for her. James knew that appearing at the Met Gala in his Royal Guard uniform would create exactly the kind of attention Emma's work deserved. The contrast between the traditional military uniform and the fashion-focused event would be impossible to ignore. More importantly, the story behind his appearance. A brother's desperate attempt to help his dying sister achieve recognition would touch people's hearts in a way that might actually make a difference. James spent weeks carefully planning every detail of his mission. He studied the Metropolitan Museum's layout, memorized the timing of red carpet arrivals, and researched security protocols used at previous Met Galas. He practiced his speech dozens of times, knowing he would only have minutes before security removed him from the premises. Every word had to count if he was going to help. Emma's story reached the right people. The biggest challenge was obtaining a complete dress uniform. James couldn't use his official uniform. That would be theft of military property, would immediately implicate his regiment. Instead, he reached out to a fellow guardsman named David, who had recently retired from service. David owed James a significant favor after James had covered for him during a difficult period, involving David's divorce and custody battle. When James explained the situation, David was initially reluctant. Lending a uniform, even a retired one, could have serious consequences if discovered. But James had been there for David during his darkest moments. The story of Emma's illness and dreams touched something deep in the former soldier's heart. David had a sister too. He couldn't imagine watching her suffer without doing everything possible to help. The night before the Met Gala, James sat in Emma's apartment helping her organize her portfolio. She had insisted on preparing everything, Despite her weakness from the latest round of chemotherapy, her hands shook slightly as she arranged photographs of her designs. But her eyes burned with the same creative fire that had driven her since childhood. She still didn't know about James's plan. He couldn't risk her trying to stop him or worrying about the consequences he might face. Emma fell asleep early that evening, exhausted from the treatment but peaceful in a way James hadn't seen since. His arrival in New York, he spent hours looking through her work, each piece more impressive than the last. Her Guardians of Time collection wasn't just fashion, it was wearable art that told stories about strength, protection, and the evolution of human civilization. These designs deserved to be seen by the world. On the day of the Met Gala, James told Emma he was going to explore the city while she rested. Instead, he traveled to a small hotel near the Metropolitan Museum where he had reserved a room under a false name. He carefully put on David's uniform, checking every detail in the mirror. The red tunic fit perfectly, the brass buttons gleamed, and the tall bearskin hat sat at the exact angle he had worn thousands of times before. As James walked toward the museum, his heart pounded in a way it never had during his years of guard duty. Standing motionless for hours required mental discipline, but this required courage of a different kind. He was about to break protocol, risk his career, and expose his personal life to global scrutiny. But every step brought him closer to giving Emma the recognition she deserved. The red carpet was already bustling with activity when James arrived. He positioned himself at the back of the crowd of photographers and media personnel waiting for the right moment. He needed maximum visibility, but also enough time to tell Emma's story before security intervened. The timing had to be perfect. At exactly 7:47 p.m., James stepped onto the red carpet. The sensation was unlike anything he had experienced during his military service. Instead of standing guard while others passed by, he was the center of attention. Every step up the museum's stone stairs brought dozens of camera flashes and increasingly confused murmurs from the crowd. James maintained the perfect posture and expressionless face that had been drilled into him during years of training.
Ow.
Inside, his mind raced with thoughts of Emma. She was probably sleeping in her hospital bed at that moment, unaware that her brother was about to risk everything to help her dreams come true. The weight of the uniform felt different now. Instead of representing duty to the crown, he represented love for his sister. As he reached the top of the stairs, James could see Anna Wintour near the museum entrance, her expression showing the first signs of concern about this unexpected disruption to her carefully orchestrated event. Security guards were moving closer, though they seemed uncertain about how to handle someone in military uniform who hadn't actually broken any laws yet. This was the moment James had prepared for. Taking a deep breath, he turned to face the crowd of photographers, celebrities, and media personnel. For the first time in his military career, he was about to speak while wearing his uniform. But this wasn't about military protocol anymore. This was about love, dreams, and the precious time that remained to make them come true. James turned to face the crowd of photographers and celebrities gathered on the museum steps. For the first time in his military career, he spoke while in uniform. His voice was clear and strong, carrying across the red carpet despite the chaos. Around him, a trained projection that came from years of military discipline ensured that every word reached the back of the crowd. "My name is James Mitchell, and I serve as a royal guard at Buckingham Palace," he began, his words causing a ripple of shock through the assembled crowd. "I am here tonight because my sister Emma is dying, and she has one dream left to fulfill." The red carpet fell completely silent. Cameras that had been flashing continuously now focused intently on James, recording every word. Celebrities stopped posing and turned their attention to this unexpected speaker. Anna Wintour stood frozen near the entrance, unsure how to respond. To this unprecedented breach of Met Gala protocol, James continued, his voice gaining strength as he thought about Emma lying in her hospital bed. Emma Mitchell is a brilliant fashion designer who has spent 5 years in New York pursuing her dreams. 3 months ago, she was diagnosed with advanced cancer. The doctors have given her 6 months to live. Several people in the crowd gasped. Audibly, James saw a famous actress wiping tears from her eyes, careful not to smudge her elaborate makeup. Social media exploded as people began filming and sharing the moment live across the world. The hashtag EMM's dream began trending within minutes. Tonight's theme is Guardians of Time, and my sister has created the most incredible collection inspired by protective garments throughout history, James explained, his voice breaking slightly as emotion overcame his military composure.
Our
Work deserves to be seen, to be celebrated, to be remembered. That's why I'm here, risking everything, because some dreams are worth fighting for. The crowd erupted in applause, but James wasn't finished. He reached into his uniform and pulled out his phone, showing photographs of Emma's designs to the nearest cameras. The images were stunning. Evening gowns that incorporated chainmail elements, cocktail dresses inspired by samurai armor, avant-garde pieces that transformed military uniforms into high-fashion statements. Anna Wintour, who had been watching from near the entrance, slowly walked down the steps toward James. The crowd held its breath, expecting her to have him removed for disrupting her event. Instead, she stopped directly in front of him and asked quietly, "Where is your sister now?" "She's at Mount Sinai Hospital," James replied, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "She doesn't even know I'm here." She would have tried to stop me if she knew what I was planning. Anna studied the photographs on James's phone, her expression unreadable. As someone who had dedicated her life to recognizing and promoting exceptional fashion talent, she could see immediately that Emma's work was extraordinary. The technical skill, the creative vision, the emotional depth, these weren't just clothes. They were wearable art that told powerful stories about strength and protection. "Security," Anna called out, and James prepared to be escorted away. Instead, she continued, "Please arrange transportation to Mount Sinai Hospital immediately." She turned back to James. "We're going to meet your sister." The crowd erupted again, this time in cheers and applause. Several celebrities approached James, asking how they could help promote Emma's work. A famous pop star immediately posted about Emma's story to her 200 million social media followers. Fashion bloggers and journalists began researching Emma's background, preparing articles about her incredible designs and her brother's dramatic gesture of love. The ride to the hospital passed in a blur. James sat in the car with Anna Wintour and 3 other influential fashion industry leaders, all studying Emma's portfolio on their phones. They discussed the technical aspects of her designs, the emotional impact of her story, and the potential for her work to inspire others. James watched New York City pass by outside the window, hardly believing what was happening at the hospital. Emma was awake and confused to see her brother returning with a group of elegantly dressed strangers. When Anna Wintour introduced herself and explained what had happened at the Met Gala, Emma's eyes filled with tears. She couldn't believe that James had risked his career, his reputation, his future to help her dreams come true. The next morning, Emma's story was front-page news around the world. Fashion magazines rushed to feature her designs. A major fashion house offered to produce her Guardians of Time collection. Several celebrities commissioned custom pieces. Most importantly, a cancer research foundation reached out, wanting to use Emma's story and her armor-inspired designs to promote awareness about the strength required to fight the disease. Emma lived for 8 more months instead of the predicted 6. She spent that time seeing her dreams come true beyond anything she had ever imagined. Her designs were featured in major fashion shows, worn by celebrities on red carpets, and displayed in museums as examples of fashion as art. She established a scholarship fund for aspiring designers from working-class backgrounds, ensuring that talent would be recognized regardless of financial circumstances. When Emma passed away peacefully the following spring, James was holding her hand. Her final words were about how proud she was of the courage he had shown that night at the Met Gala. The uniform he wore had always represented duty and service. But that night it had represented something even more powerful: the lengths someone will go to for love. James returned to his duties as a royal guard, but he was forever changed by the experience. He understood now that being a true guardian meant protecting not just palaces and traditions, but dreams, hopes, and the precious time we have to make them real. Emma's legacy lived on through her designs, her scholarship fund, and the countless people inspired by her story of courage in the face of impossible odds. The Met Gala returned to its usual glamour the following year. But people still talked about the night when a British royal guard taught the fashion world what it truly meant to be a guardian of time.